Hey everyone! This is a quick reminder to subscribe and hit that like button. It lets me know that you are enjoying my content. Also, feel free to drop your suggestions for future stories in the comments below. Thank you for listening, and let's dive right in. I got into med school. Still doesn't feel real when I say it out loud, or in my head for that matter, but it's true. University of Michigan, full scholarship, pre-med track. I should be excited. And I am, but mostly I'm stressed. I've never lived in a big city before. I've never even taken a city bus by myself. And now I'm heading off to start the biggest chapter of my life, surrounded by people who probably got perfect SAT scores, while I had to Google what a net carb was the other day. So yeah, I need to be prepared. That means money. My mom's a single parent, the strongest person I know, hands down. She raised me, my older sister, and my disaster of a younger brother without ever letting us feel like we were missing anything. And even now, when we're all practically adults, she still finds ways to stretch herself thin for us. My sister's in her final year of law school. My brother, well, he's a jerk. But he throws a baseball like his arm was blessed by the gods, so everyone thinks he's going to make it big. Still, Mom never stops helping us, even when she doesn't have to. And I just couldn't stand the thought of leaving for school and putting more pressure on her. So when I saw a flyer tacked up at the laundromat, help wanted, local bookstore, evenings, cash paid weekly, I didn't even hesitate. Books. I love books. Always have. I was the weird kid who read the DSM-4 for fun in middle school. Between Grey's Anatomy, House, and all the memoirs from broken surgeons trying to find redemption, I pretty much grew up in a haze of fictional hospitals and tragic diagnoses. I called the number as soon as I got home. I expected a manager. Maybe someone older, grumpy, with a smoker's cough. Instead, I got Jack. Sandy? Yeah. I know you. You're in my bio class, right? That threw me off for a second. I mean, Jack? Quiet, leans back in his chair. Jack? I barely remembered ever hearing him speak in class. But sure enough, it was him. He laughed a little. Didn't expect you to call. You're cool. I'll put in a good word for you. That was it. Next thing I knew, I was scheduled for my first shift. The bookstore looked like something out of an Instagram post. Wooden floors, tall shelves, old brass lamps on side tables, and this lingering scent of paper and cinnamon. A little messy, but cozy. Familiar, even. Jack was already behind the counter when I walked in, half organizing receipts, half scrolling through his phone like he was trying to look busy. "Hey," he said, smiling like we'd been coworkers for months instead of whatever we were. "You made it." He showed me around the place without much formality. Cash register basics, sorting shelves, the difference between literature and contemporary fiction. It's apparently very serious. And a brief mention of how romance novels go up front because the old ladies like easy access. He was chill. Awkward, but in that kinda endearing way, like a golden retriever who got stuck in a philosophy class. Eventually, he showed me the staff room, which had 2 lockers, a sink that leaked, and a microwave that looked like it had been possessed by the ghost of a Hot Pocket. As he was pointing out where the emergency flashlight was, his phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen, muttered something under his breath, and said, "Crap, I have to step out for like 10 minutes. Is that cool? You good?" "Sure," I said. "What's the worst that could happen in 10 minutes? Famous last words, right?" He gave me a thumbs up and walked out the back, letting the door close behind him. I stood there for a second, alone behind the register, just absorbing it all. The silence, the creak of the old floorboards, the way the air felt just a little too still. I turned a slow circle, looking out across the store. Books stacked high, shadows stretching between the shelves. It was peaceful, I told myself. Kind of dreamy. Then the bell above the door rang, and everything stopped feeling peaceful. She walked in like she had always been there, like the world adjusted around her presence. A woman dressed in black from head to toe, full-length dress, gloves, a veil covering her face, thin enough to suggest the shape of her head beneath, but thick enough that I couldn't see her eyes. She didn't hesitate. She walked straight to the counter and placed a book down in front of me. It looked old, older than the store, leather binding cracked like dried skin, no title, no author. She said nothing, just stood there, and even though my brain screamed, "This isn't normal," a different part of me whispered, "She's returning it." It didn't make any sense. We weren't a library. And Jack had told me, clearly, no returns unless the book is damaged and you have the receipt. This didn't look damaged. This looked ritualistic. Still, I cleared my throat and said, "Are you here to return this?" She nodded once. "Do you have the receipt?" She didn't move. I waited. A beat passed, then another. Stillness like I've never felt before. It was like time froze around her. I asked again, my voice quieter this time, almost involuntary. "Ma'am, receipt?" Nothing. I started to think she wasn't breathing, and then, slam, the back door flew open behind me. Jack was back, his face drained of color the moment he saw her. Shit. He bolted behind the counter, shoved me aside like I was made of cardboard, and snatched the book off the counter. He ducked down, reached under the register, and pulled out another book, just as old, just as cracked and cursed-looking. He slid it across the counter toward her with both hands. She took it and left. No words, no sound, just gone. I turned to Jack, stunned. What the hell was that? He didn't answer right away. He looked like he was about to throw up. Then he reached into his back pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and handed it to me like it was a bomb with the pin still in it. I opened it. The paper was yellowed, soft from being folded too many times. At the top, in slanted, hurried handwriting, it said, "Rules of the store. Don't accept foreign money. If someone asks for the Book of Love, say, we don't have it. If the man with the Superman t-shirt comes in, never look away from him until he leaves. If books fall from the shelves, don't put them back. Don't make the veiled woman wait." I stared at the rules, read them again and again. They didn't even feel like rules. They felt like warnings. Jack finally broke the silence. "I know they look weird, but trust me, you don't want to mess with any of this shit." I looked up slowly. "You're serious?" "I had no one to tell me these things," he said, voice low. "So I'm telling you, at least the ones that matter." "The ones that matter?" I said. "What do you mean some? There's more?" He shrugged, helpless. "You'll figure some out yourself. These are just the ones that'll keep you alive." I asked, "What is this place, Jack?" He looked down. "I don't know, Sandy. It's like the place has a mind of its own." Then he added, "Pays well, though. Mrs. Higgins is old school, but she pays cash and doesn't skimp. I guess that's why I'm still here." I stared at him. He looked like he didn't believe his own words. After an awkward silence, he handed me a small silver keychain with 3 store keys. "Well, your shift starts tomorrow at 10. If anything happens, just give me a call." I nodded, took the keys, walked out into the setting sun. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the paper clutched in my hand, the words echoing over and over again. "Don't make the veiled woman wait. Never look away from Superman. Don't put fallen books back." None of it made sense, and yet I knew I'd be back tomorrow. I came this close to not showing up the next morning. I had the keys in my hand, my shoes on, even my backpack slung over one shoulder, and I just stood there in the hallway of our apartment, frozen. The image of that veiled woman at the counter replayed in my head like a looped video I couldn't pause. Her silent stare, the decaying book, the way Jack had looked when he saw her, not surprised, terrified. Everything in me screamed, "Don't go back." But then I remembered the paycheck, and my mom, and how despite the flames behind her veil, the woman didn't do anything. Not to me. Not yet. So I went in. I arrived at the bookstore around 9:30 a.m., half an hour early, hoping that a little extra time inside would help me shake the dread in my chest. It didn't. The moment I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, the stillness hit me, like the store had been holding its breath, waiting for me. I moved slowly, mechanically, turned on the lights, booted up the register. The hum of fluorescent bulbs flickered overhead like they were struggling to wake up. I flipped the sign from closed to open. That's when I saw them. Old women, 5, maybe 6 of them, already lined up outside, waiting like they'd been there all morning. I barely finished turning the sign before they rushed in. "Excuse me, dear," one said, brushing past me like I was a revolving door. They didn't even glance around the store. They made a beeline straight to a display near the entrance where a stack of glossy, newly released novels had been set up overnight. Each woman grabbed a copy, like it was the last slice of pie at a church potluck. I stepped behind the register, a little dazed. "Good morning," I offered. No one replied. One by one, they came up, placed their books down, handed me cash, and left. Not a single one said thank you, or asked about store hours, or commented on the weather like people usually do. It was like they were moving through some silent ritual. Still, it was normal. Normal adjacent, at least. The rest of the day followed that same eerie rhythm. A few customers came and went. Most barely spoke. A couple of tourists wandered in, browsed, bought nothing, left. At some point I microwaved a granola bar and tried to read the back of a medical thriller someone had left at the counter, but the words blurred together. It wasn't until around 6:45 p.m. when we were nearly closing that things started to turn. There were 2 customers left in the store, 1 woman, 1 man, each browsing in separate aisles. The woman was the first to break the silence. She placed a book back on the shelf, turned toward me with a tight, grim sort of smile, and said, "Nothing for me today." I gave a small shrug. "That's fine." She walked out without another word. And then it was just him. The man came up to the register and placed 2 books in front of me. Thick hard covers with bold titles and shiny covers, some best-selling stuff. He looked average, like the kind of guy who'd try to sell you crypto at a gas station. I smiled politely. "Evening, that'll be $21.50. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a handful of bills, and immediately my gut dropped. They were colorful. Not just faded American bills or old commemorative ones. These were unmistakably Canadian dollars, bright reds, purples, and blues. They looked like Monopoly money to me. I'm sorry," I said, holding up the note. "We're in Michigan, sir." He chuckled. "Yeah, I know, but we're practically next-door neighbors. Does it really make a difference?" I smiled, trying to stay polite. "Well, I think my boss would prefer not to deal with currency exchanges." He shrugged. "It's literally $20. Can't you be nice, just this once?" His tone had shifted, a little more pointed, a little more expecting. I straightened up. "I'm sorry, sir. Store policy. No foreign currency." That's when he looked at me, really looked at me, and his eyes, they changed. One second they were regular, dark brown. The next they ignited. I don't mean metaphorically, I mean literally. His pupils vanished into swirling black pits, and flames licked the edges of his irises. Orange and red, burning from the inside out, as if his skull was a furnace and his eyes were the vents. I stumbled back, my hip hitting the corner of the counter. And then, just as quickly, it was gone. He blinked. His eyes were normal again. He offered a small, cold smile. "Well then, I shall be on my way." The words didn't match the voice. It was too calm, too theatrical, like he was quoting someone from a century ago. He turned and walked out of the store with perfect, measured steps, like a dancer exiting stage left. I didn't move until the bell above the door jingled and silence returned. Then my phone rang. I jumped so hard I nearly knocked the register drawer open. "Jack." I picked up, still breathless. "Hey." He sounded casual. "So, how was it?" "It was fine," I said quickly. "Pretty busy, actually. The old ladies were obsessed with the new book drop. Rest of the day was smooth, except for this one guy." "What guy?" "Some dude tried to pay with Canadian dollars." There was a pause. Then Jack's voice a little tighter now. "Did you sell him the books?" I blinked. "Of course not. I'm not that dumb, Jack." He exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding his breath. "Good. I'm glad you followed the rules." I almost said what rules, but then I remembered the folded paper in my back pocket. The rules, the ones I had completely forgotten about until just now. "Oh, yeah, of course," I said. "Didn't want to disappoint you." Jack didn't say anything for a second, then added, "You're on again tomorrow. I'll stop by around closing. We'll need to restock some shelves. If anything weird happens, just call me." "Sure," I said. He hung up. I pulled out the paper and unfolded it slowly, reading each rule one by one, as if I hadn't already memorized them in the back of my mind. "Don't accept foreign money." I stared at that line. The man's burning eyes. The way he spoke. The way my entire body had screamed wrong. I don't know what would have happened if I'd accepted that $20 bill. But I know this. I never want to find out. I didn't sleep again. Not because of nightmares. I wasn't lucky enough to fall asleep in the first place. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw the man with the Canadian bills. The way his pupils caught fire. The heat behind them that didn't belong in a human body. That slow, smug smile on the sentence that felt like it had been pulled out of a play from the 1800s. "Well then, I shall be on my way." It repeated in my head, over and over, until morning bled into daylight. I should have called out. I should have faked the flu or said I had orientation stuff for school. But instead, I got dressed, packed a protein bar and a bottle of water, and walked straight back into that cursed little bookstore like I had something to prove. I arrived just before 10. The store was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that wasn't peaceful but watchful. The lights buzzed faintly, like they were straining. Dust floated in the air, catching the morning sun through the front windows in slow, deliberate spirals. I unlocked the register, wiped down the counter, and tried to act normal. But my hands were already trembling. I kept the rules in my back pocket, folded twice. I'd read them again before walking in, just to be sure. If the man with the Superman t-shirt comes in, never look away from him until he leaves. That one stuck with me. It sounded stupid when I first read it. But after the Canadian guy, and whatever the hell had happened to his eyes, I didn't think anything was stupid anymore. Business was slow that morning. A couple of moms with toddlers wandered through the children's section. A teenager came in asking about books for school, and left empty-handed when I told him we didn't carry textbooks. Around noon, I microwaved a sad burrito and leaned against the counter, watching the clock, trying not to count the seconds. And then the bell above the door jingled. He walked in. I knew it was him the moment I saw the shirt, bright blue, giant red and yellow Superman logo on the chest, a size too small, tight across his stomach. He was tall, broad, greasy black hair and pale skin, the kind of guy who looked like he smelled like gym socks and Mountain Dew. His face was round, his chin covered in patchy stubble, and when he smiled at me, it was not a nice smile. It was smug. Knowing. Like he already had the upper hand and was just waiting for me to realize it. I didn't smile back. I didn't say a word. I just watched him. He walked past the counter, deeper into the aisles. I turned with him, keeping my eyes locked on his back as he moved. He stopped at the Fiction AL section, pulled out a paperback, flipped it over, read the back cover, and put it back. Then another, and another. And then, he slid one into his pants, like it was no big deal, like he'd done it 100 times, a thick paperback, easily 2 inches wide. He tucked it down the front of his sweatpants like a pack of gum. My stomach turned. I wanted to gag, not just because of the theft, but because, who does that? What kind of person sticks stolen books down their pants? Hey, I blurted before I could stop myself. Hey, no stealing, you douche. It came out louder than I meant it to. Fierce, unfiltered. He froze, then he turned to face me, fast. So fast the entire shelf beside him trembled. A few books fell to the floor. I blinked. He was gone. Not out the door, not behind the shelf. Just gone. I didn't hear the bell. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't even hear breathing. My heart dropped into my stomach. I ran, around the counter, through the aisles, checking every row, every corner, panic building in my throat. Then I found him, toward the back of the store, stuffing a massive encyclopedia into his pants. Like he'd never left. Hey, I yelled again, put that down. He turned slowly, and his eyes were black. Not dark brown, not just shadowed, pure black, glossy, depthless voids, and then they ignited. Flames. Actual flames inside his eyes, flickering from the inside out, like the last guy. But this was worse, stronger, more furious. He stepped forward, one foot, then another, heavy. You think you're that good, newbie? He growled. His voice was lower than it should have been, like two people speaking at once, one whispering and one growling beneath it. I stepped back, tripped over a display of romance novels and fell flat on my ass. The air around him shimmered, like heat coming off pavement. He kept walking toward me, flames flickering in his eyes. And then, he vanished. No warning, no smoke, no blink, just gone. The only thing left behind was the encyclopedia, lying spine up on the carpeted floor like it had been dropped mid-theft. I sat there for a while, my knees pulled up to my chest, my breathing shallow, hands shaking. The bell above the door rang. I flinched. It was Jack. He stopped mid-step when he saw me on the floor. You look pale, he said. What happened? I swallowed. My mouth was so dry it hurt. Superman shirt guy. He groaned. Ugh, I hate that guy. Comes in every other day like clockwork. Tries to stuff books in his sweatpants like no one's gonna notice. He vanished, I said. I shouted. I saw him. His eyes, they were fire. Jack's face went still. He didn't ask what I meant. He didn't say I was imagining it. He just nodded. Yeah, he said quietly. It's like anyone else. When you do the right thing and they get mad, you see more of them. I stared at him. Who are they, Jack? He looked down. I don't know, Sandy. Mrs. Higgins never told me. Before I could ask anything else, the bell jingled again. We both turned. No one was there, but the air shifted, thickened, and then the voice came, low, guttural, inhuman. I need the Book of Love. Jack didn't miss a beat. We don't have it. The voice repeated, louder this time. I need the Book of Love. Jack snapped. We don't have it. Then, darkness. Every light in the store blew out at once. Not flickered, died. The air turned to ash, thick and hot and choking. Then the voice roared, I need it now. The entire store shook, shelves rattled, books fell, the register drawer slid open on its own, and then, silence. Complete, suffocating silence. Jack and I stood frozen in the pitch black. 5 minutes passed, 10, 20, stillness. Finally, with a soft click, the lights came back on. The store was empty. No one at the counter, no footprints on the floor, not even a breath of sound. But then came the smell. Burnt meat, wood smoke, ash. It rolled in like a wave, heavy and unmistakable, like a fire had just been put out, but the scent of charred flesh still hung in the air. Jack didn't say a word, neither did I. We just started restocking. In silence, I glanced at him once. His expression was not blank, not emotionless, just shattered. And I knew then, without a doubt, he'd seen something worse than me, but he stayed. And so did I. I had a couple days off after that. Jack said the schedule was light and offered to cover the next few shifts. I didn't argue. After what I saw, the Superman guy vanishing, the flaming eyes, the demon voice demanding a book we didn't carry, I needed space to think. But thinking made it worse. The more I replayed it in my head, the less it made sense. The lights blowing out, the silence, the fire smell, the voice that filled the whole store like it came up from the floorboards. Jack and I standing in the dark, waiting, breathing shallow like we'd just seen something we weren't supposed to see. I stayed in my room most of that time, barely spoke to anyone. Just existed in limbo, holding the rules in my hand like a lifeline, flipping the paper open and closed until the crease in the middle nearly tore. Rule 2. If someone asks for the Book of Love, say we don't have it. We followed it, and still, that happened. The day I returned to the store, it was morning again, sunny. Birds chirping like they had no clue anything was wrong in the world. I walked in expecting Jack, same as always, head down behind the counter, scribbling in one of his mystery notebooks, chewing the cap off a pen, but he wasn't there. Instead, Mrs. Higgins was. Hi, dear, she said warmly, like I was visiting her for tea. You must be Sandy? Yes, ma'am, I said stiffly. Her smile didn't falter. Jack's sick, so I'm just filling in for him a bit. Would you mind taking over some of his shifts for the next week? I blinked. No, ma'am, I don't mind. I'd be happy to. Lovely, she said, clasping her hands together. I'll leave the restock paperwork with you. If anything comes up, feel free to call me. Jack probably won't answer anyway. I hesitated. Why not? She gave me a look like I'd asked why water was wet. Well, he's sick, dear. Do you want to be bothered when you're sick? Her tone was sweet, but her eyes didn't match. Still, I nodded. Right, of course. Mrs. Higgins went back to the back room without offering to train me, explain anything, or even check the drawer, and I was left standing behind the counter like nothing had happened. But everything had, and the store felt off. Not louder, not creepier, just too still. Customers were practically non-existent that day. A man in a trench coat came in, wandered the poetry aisle, and left without a word. Around lunchtime, a young woman asked for a copy of a book we didn't carry. That was it. Except for him, the Superman shirt guy. He came in again, didn't steal, didn't speak, just walked past the register slowly, his head tilted like he was listening for something. He looked directly at me. I didn't look away, not once. We stared at each other for a solid 5 seconds before he grinned, a lazy teeth-baring smirk, and turned to leave. The door jingled. That was all. But the longer I stood there, the more anxious I got. Something wasn't right. Not with the customers. Not with the air. Not with the fact that Jack hadn't called or texted in 2 days. He always checked in. Always. And the way Mrs. Higgins spoke about him, like he wasn't just sick, but gone, kept playing in my head. So I did something stupid. I opened the camera system. Jack showed me the basics during my first shift. Said we kept footage for 2 days before the system wiped itself automatically. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. Maybe just proof that he'd been here, that everything was fine. But what I found instead, it made my blood run cold. I found the feed from the day I was off. Jack was working the counter, same as usual. No one else around. Then the bell above the door jingled. Superman guy walked in. Jack's eyes immediately followed him. He tracked the guy with laser focus, didn't blink once. Just like the rule said. The man did what he always did. Wandered. Grabbed a book, stuffed it in his pants. Jack reacted. He stepped forward, shouted something I couldn't hear through the silent footage. The guy dropped the book. And then, a book fell off a shelf behind Jack. Just one. No one near it. No breeze. No bump. It felt like it had been pushed by air. Like the shelf was breathing. Jack didn't see it, because someone had walked up to the counter, a woman asking something. He left the aisle to help her. When he came back, he picked up both books, the one Superman dropped and the one that had fallen on its own. He placed them on the return cart, and then, he froze. His shoulders tensed, his knees locked, he collapsed. Hard. Face first onto the wooden floor. No sound, no movement, and then a second later, blood. It poured from his mouth, dark and thick, pooling beneath his cheek. I watched it spread across the floor like ink. He didn't twitch. He didn't gasp. He just died. And for the next 3 hours he lay there. No one walked in. Not a single soul. Not until the next morning. Mrs. Higgins. She entered through the front like it was any normal day. She walked to the counter, looked down at him, sighed, and then grabbed him by the arms. She dragged his body across the store, to the back room. The one that was always locked. I watched her disappear through the door with Jack's limp body in tow. A minute later, she came back with a mop and a bucket. Yellow plastic, classic janitor setup. She cleaned the blood, calm, methodical, not a single flinch, not a single pause. When she was done, she washed her hands, adjusted her cardigan, and turned the closed sign to open. That's when the feed ended. And that's when I realized I had arrived just minutes later. I pushed away from the computer and ran to the counter. I barely made it before I threw up all over the floor. Acid and granola and coffee splattered on the mat where customers usually stand. Tears welled up in my eyes, burning hot. I wiped my mouth and stumbled toward the aisle where I saw him fall. There, faintly visible, were drag marks, barely noticeable, smudged now but still there. I turned to the back room. The door was unlocked. She must have forgotten. I opened it. And there he was, Jack, lying on a pile of old cardboard boxes, half covered by a brown sheet. His skin was pale, his mouth slightly open. The corner of the sheet stained a deep, dried red. I froze. My brain screamed to run, but my feet stayed planted. And that's when I felt it. A shift, a presence. I turned back toward the front of the store, and I saw her. The veiled woman, standing at the counter. This time, she held 2 books. She was looking at me, directly at me. Our eyes met, and through the black mesh of her veil, I saw it. Her eyes, black as pitch. And in the center, fire, burning, waiting. And in that moment, I remembered the 5th rule. Don't make the veiled woman wait. I already had, and I knew. I'd be lying beside Jack by the end of the day.